There is a dangerous mythology in the world of high finance. It is a quiet, seductive whisper that echoes through the glass-walled boardrooms of Wall Street and the private trading floors of Mayfair. It is the belief that if you are smart enough, if you are ruthless enough, and if your models are complex enough, you can tame the market. You can bend the invisible hand to your will, but the market is not a machine. It is a living, breathing beast, fueled by human panic and human greed. And it has a profound, almost poetic sense of irony. Today, we are going to look at one of the greatest financial parables of the modern era. It is a story of unparalleled genius and catastrophic hubris. It is the story of a private citizen who looked at a sovereign nation, saw a glitch in its armor, and decided to break its central bank. He succeeded, netting an incomprehensible $1 billion in a single day. He became a legend. He became invincible, until he wasn't, because the very same aggressive logic that crowned him king of the financial world eventually led him into a trap so devastating, it nearly wiped away his most famous victory. This is the story of the man who broke the Bank of England, and the single, catastrophic trade that proved even the smartest man in the room can be humbled by a shifting global landscape. To understand the arrogance, we first have to understand the genius. The year was 1990. The geopolitical landscape of Europe was transforming. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and European nations were desperately trying to link their economies together to prevent future conflicts and stabilize trade. They created something called the exchange rate mechanism, or the ERM. Think of the ERM as a financial bungee cord. The participating countries agreed to peg their currencies to the German Deutsche Mark. Their currencies were allowed to float up and down slightly, but if they drifted too far, the government was legally obligated to step in and fix it, either by buying their own currency to raise its value or by manipulating interest rates. The British government, led by Prime Minister John Major, entered the ERM with immense political pride. They pegged the British pound at a high rate, declaring to the world that the British economy was strong, stable, and equal to the might of a reunified Germany. There was just one massive, undeniable problem. The British economy was not strong. It was suffocating. Inflation was incredibly high. Exports were struggling, and the country was teetering on the edge of a brutal recession. To keep the pound artificially high inside this European bungee cord, the Bank of England had to keep interest rates punishingly high, bleeding their own citizens dry just to maintain an illusion of strength on the global stage. It was a systemic flaw, a massive, glaring glitch in the matrix of global finance. It was an economic lie held together entirely by political stubbornness. And in the financial markets, a lie is just an arbitrage opportunity waiting to be exploited. Enter George Soros and his chief strategist, Stanley Druckenmiller. Operating the Quantum Fund, they looked at the British pound and realized something terrifyingly simple. The Bank of England was bluffing. The math did not support the politics. Eventually, the bungee cord was going to snap. Most traders saw the weakness, but they were too afraid to act. You do not simply bet against a sovereign nation. A central bank has billions of dollars in reserves. They can crush a private trader with a single policy change. But Soros did not see a sovereign nation. He saw a wounded animal backed into a corner, and he decided it was time to strike. Soros and Druckenmiller did not just decide to short the British pound, they decided to annihilate it. Shorting a currency means you are betting its value will drop. You borrow the currency, sell it at the current high price, and wait for the price to collapse. Then, you buy it back at the new, cheaper price, return the borrowed money, and keep the massive difference. But to break a central bank, you need leverage. You need a hammer so heavy that the bank simply cannot absorb the blow. The Quantum Fund began quietly building their position. They didn't just use their own money, they borrowed billions. They leveraged their entire fund to build a $10 billion bet against the British government. September 1992 arrived. The pressure in the global markets was palpable. Currency speculators around the world were beginning to smell blood in the water. The German central bank, the Bundesbank, publicly hinted that certain European currencies might need to be devalued. That was the spark. On Tuesday, September 15th, Soros began selling pounds in massive, violent waves. The sheer volume of the sell-off triggered alarm bells across London. The next day would go down in history as Black Wednesday. As the sun rose over London on September 16th, the Bank of England opened its doors to a bloodbath. The value of the pound was plummeting toward the absolute floor of the ERM limit. Under the rules of the treaty, the British government had to intervene. At 8:40 a.m., the Bank of England started buying pounds. They bought hundreds of millions, dipping into their precious foreign reserves. But every time they bought, Soros and the market dumped more heavily. The bank's immense buying power was being swallowed whole by the tidal wave of short selling. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. By 10:30 a.m., the British government panicked. Prime Minister John Major and his Chancellor Norman Lamont authorized an emergency interest rate hike, raising rates from 10% to 12%. It was an act of absolute desperation, designed to make the pound more attractive to investors. The market didn't even blink. Soros kept selling. At 2:15 p.m., the Bank of England did the unthinkable. They raised interest rates again, pushing them to a staggering, economy-crushing 15%. It was financial suicide for British homeowners and businesses, a move made purely out of political pride to save face in Europe. But the smart money knew the truth. If a government has to raise interest rates by 5% in a single day, they are not showing strength. They are bleeding to death. Soros sat in his office watching the terminal. He knew he had them. He knew they were out of ammunition. The Bank of England had spent billions of pounds in a single afternoon, and they had failed to move the needle. At 7 p.m. that evening, a pale and defeated Norman Lamont stepped outside the Treasury building in London. Into a cluster of flashing microphones and cameras, he announced that the United Kingdom was suspending its membership in the European exchange rate mechanism. They were letting the pound float. The bungee cord snapped. The currency immediately plummeted by 15% against the Deutsche Mark. In the span of 24 hours, the British government lost billions in taxpayer money trying to defend an indefensible lie. And George Soros? He bought back his shorted pounds at the newly crashed price. When the dust settled, Soros had personally made over $1 billion in pure profit. The financial world was completely stunned. A single hedge fund manager had gone to war with the Bank of England, a centuries-old institution of sovereign power, and he had won. He was instantly immortalized by the press as the man who broke the Bank of England. What happens to the human mind when it achieves the impossible? What happens to a trader's psychology when they look at a sovereign superpower, bend it to their will, and walk away with $1 billion? This is where the story shifts from a thriller to a parable. This is where we learn about the danger of the financial God complex. For years after Black Wednesday, the quantum fund was untouchable. Soros was viewed not just as an investor, but as an oracle. When he spoke, global markets moved. When he took a position, other funds blindly followed. It is incredibly difficult to maintain intellectual humility when the entire world is constantly telling you that you are a genius. But markets are incredibly dynamic. What works perfectly in one decade can become a fatal trap in the next. The logic that won Black Wednesday was based on a very specific premise. Governments will eventually bend to undeniable economic realities, no matter how much political pride is on the line. Soros believed he had unlocked the fundamental code of sovereign debt and currency. He believed he knew exactly how governments behaved when backed into a corner. 6 years later, in 1998, that belief would be tested on a radically different battlefield: the Russian Federation. The mid-1990s were a chaotic, wildly lucrative time in emerging markets, and Russia was the ultimate Wild West. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country was transitioning to a capitalist economy. It was messy, it was corrupt, but it offered astronomical yields for foreign investors willing to take the risk. By 1998, however, the Russian economy was violently unraveling. Global oil prices had plummeted, crippling their primary source of revenue. The government was drowning in debt, struggling to collect taxes, and fighting a costly war in Chechnya. To keep the country afloat, the Russian government was issuing short-term bonds called GKOs, offering incredibly high, unsustainable interest rates just to attract foreign capital. It was another systemic glitch, another house of cards. But this time, Soros took a different angle. He looked at Russia and saw an economy that was too big to fail. He reasoned that the Western world, specifically the United States, the G7, and the International Monetary Fund, would never allow a nuclear-armed superpower to simply go bankrupt. The geopolitical fallout would be too dangerous. An economically collapsed Russia could mean loose nukes, widespread famine, and political extremism. Soros's thesis was logical. He believed the IMF would always step in to bail Russia out, artificially propping up the ruble and ensuring that those high-yielding government bonds would be paid out. Driven by the same aggressive, uncompromising conviction that won him $1 billion in London, Soros bet heavily on Russia. He poured billions of dollars into Russian equities and government bonds. He wasn't betting against the country this time. He was betting on the political safety net underneath it. He was leveraging his fund to the absolute hilt, confident that his macroeconomic thesis was flawless. He was the man who broke the Bank of England. He understood the geopolitical chessboard better than anyone alive. Or so he thought. The fatal flaw in Soros's Russian trade was the assumption that political entities will always act rationally to prevent a disaster. He had forgotten the lesson of his own victory in 1992. Sometimes, the system just breaks. In the summer of 1998, the panic in Moscow reached a fever pitch. Investors realized that the Russian government simply did not have the cash to pay the interest on its massive debts. The IMF did step in with a massive multi-billion-dollar rescue package in July, exactly as Soros had predicted. Soros felt vindicated. He urged the public and other investors to stay the course, confident the crisis had been averted. But the bleeding didn't stop. The rescue package was swallowed whole by corrupt oligarchs and capital flight, much like the Bank of England's reserves had been swallowed by short sellers years prior. Then came August 17, 1998. In a shocking, unprecedented move that stunned the global financial community, the Russian government threw up its hands. They announced they were devaluing the ruble, defaulting on their domestic debt, and declaring a moratorium on payments to foreign creditors. They simply refused to pay. The Western safety net that Soros had banked his entire thesis on completely evaporated. The IMF refused to throw more money into a black hole. The geopolitical fear of a collapsed Russia was suddenly less important than the harsh, undeniable reality of an empty bank account. The Russian market went into an absolute freefall. The value of the ruble disintegrated. The Russian bonds that Soros held, which were supposed to be guaranteed by international politics, became worthless pieces of paper overnight. Because Soros was heavily leveraged, the damage was catastrophic. When you borrow money to amplify your gains, you also amplify your losses. The market had moved against him with a speed and a violence that his models simply had not accounted for. In a matter of days, the quantum fund hemorrhaged capital. The losses were staggering. By the time Soros's team managed to liquidate their positions and untangle themselves from the wreckage of the Russian economy, they had lost an estimated $2 billion. $2 billion. Vanished. Let that sink in. The legendary trade of 1992, the one that broke the Bank of England, the one that cemented him as an unstoppable financial deity, had netted him $1 billion. A single, hubristic trade just 6 years later cost him double that amount. This is the ultimate market parable. It perfectly illustrates why the financial markets are the great equalizer. It does not matter if you have a degree from Harvard or if you sweep the floors. It does not matter if you have the best inside connections or the most powerful computers. It doesn't even matter if you are the undisputed champion of the world, a man who brought a sovereign nation to its knees. If you let your guard down, if you begin to believe that you are bigger than the market will find your blind spot. It will exploit your overconfidence, and it will take its money back. Soros survived the Russian default, of course. His fund was massive, and he lived to trade another day. But the psychological damage, the dent in the armor of invincibility, was permanent. The man who broke the Bank of England learned the hardest lesson in finance. No matter how big you get, no matter how perfectly you understand the glitches in the machine, you can never outsmart the chaos entirely. Because the market has no memory of your past victories, and the moment you think you are too smart to fail, you have already lost.